On February 15, Singapore's Lianhe Zaobao reported that the Commissioner of Police in Hong Kong, Chow, revealed that the police are considering adding facial recognition technology to the city's CCTV network, with plans to implement it as soon as this year. He expressed hopes that Hong Kong would follow mainland China's model with a surveillance camera every few steps. Currently, the first phase of the Hong Kong Police's Sharp Eyes project has installed 5,000 cameras and integrated about 6,000 cameras from government and other organizations. By the second phase, which is expected to be completed by 2028, the total numbers of cameras will rise to about 60,000, nearly covering the entire city. This news sparked widespread concern. Rather than focusing on increased safety, many people reacted with unease, asking how Hong Kong's move has suddenly shifted towards a citywide surveillance model. The concern is not without basis. Let's take a closer look at what the 60,000 cameras really mean. Some may ask, with a population of around 7.5 million, the plan is to install 60,000 surveillance cameras in Hong Kong doesn't seem that exaggerated. But the concern isn't about the sheer number, but how these cameras will be integrated into a vast network, forming a systemic structure. If these 60,000 cameras were independent of each other, they would simply be isolated data points. But once they are linked through a unified platform, interdepartmental integration, facial recognition, and continuous expansion, they cease to be just cameras and become a citywide sensor network. According to Radio Television Hong Kong, the Hong Kong government plans to invest approximately 4 billion Hong Kong dollars or 520 million USD to expand the network. A Legislative Council document mentioned that the police aim to reach around 60,000 devices by 2028, with plans to add even more cameras in later phases, pushing the total number even higher. The key point here is not that the cameras will be installed but then finished, but that the project will be rolled out in phases with expansion and further installations. This indicates that it is not a one-time effort but a long-term initiative. More importantly, facial recognition technology changes the nature of surveillance. In the past, cameras could only say someone was here, but now cameras can identify who the person is, where they came from, where they're going, how many times they appear in a day, who they interact with, and which locations they frequent. The second significant shift is a dramatic reduction in the cost of selective law enforcement. With the ability to quickly track, filter, and target individuals, law enforcement can now find someone, trace a path, or identify a social circle much more efficiently than before. The more advanced the technology, the easier it becomes to shift exceptional measures into routine practices. Initially, it may be used for major cases, but over time it could extend to regular cases and eventually be used in situations where non-compliance leads to stricter measures. The third change is the encroachment of public power into private spaces. The police publicly discussed incorporating shopping mall cameras into the system and received positive responses from businesses. This means that many of your daily activities such as shopping, dining, watching movies, buying goods, or picking up children may take place in commercial spaces but could end up on a unified public safety platform. In fact, this isn't sudden acceleration. There have been signals pointing in this direction for some time. As early as June 22, 2025, iCable News reported that the conviction rate under the Hong Kong national security law has surpassed 90% over the past 5 years. Hong Kong's current Secretary of Justice, Paul Lam, stated that prosecutions are well-founded and criticized those attempting to smear or obstruct national development. When viewed together, this statement is doing two things. First, presenting a striking number, over 90% conviction rate. Second, immediately qualifying that number. Some reports have analyzed that Paul Lam's statement essentially tells the public not to interpret the high conviction rate as judicial bias or narrowing space. Instead, it suggests that the prosecution is thorough, the evidence strong, and the charges carefully considered, which is why the conviction rate is so high. More importantly, his phrase, political forces trying to smear, shifts the question about the high conviction rate into the accusation of malicious political attacks. Moreover, a conviction rate above 95% is nearly unheard of in global judicial systems. To the average person, this sounds almost like once you're charged, you're almost guaranteed to be convicted. In response, some commentators have drawn historical comparison, noting that Nazi Germany's political cases had a conviction rate of around 92%. The point being, when the conviction rate in any field is this high, it no longer resembles the judicial contest we are used to, but rather it appears that the outcome was already largely decided. When you look at this alongside the earlier discussions about increasing camera density and adding facial recognition across Hong Kong, the picture becomes clearer. The law tells you that once you enter the system, it's hard to escape, while technology makes it even harder to avoid being seen, identified, and tracked. When these two factors combine, the situation changes. It's not just about catching thieves or maintaining order, it's about turning the city into a fully monitored environment. Moreover, some media outlets have pointed out that beyond the plan for widespread surveillance, the Hong Kong government's intention to monitor all citizens is evident in other areas as well. First, there is the effort to cut off overseas resources and strengthen deterrence. Around August 4, 2025, multiple media outlets report that Hong Kong authorities had escalated measures against 16 overseas individuals. Take the example of Victor Ho, a Hong Kong exile living in Canada. In recent years, he has been accused by the Hong Kong Police National Security Department of being involved in activities related to the overseas Hong Kong Parliament. He faces charges of subverting state power and other national security crimes. A warrant for his arrest was issued and the police placed a bounty on his capture. In August 2025, the Hong Kong government escalated its supply cutoff measures. It banned anyone from providing financial or economic resources to him, prohibited renting property or forming business partnerships with him, and cancelled the travel documents of those holding Hong Kong passports. Those who assist or violate these restrictions could face up to 7 years in prison. Another individual, Chong Yi-fen, who also included on this list of 16 people. Fen is a China scholar who has worked in Australia for many years and is seen as a pro-democracy voice due to his outspoken views on Chinese politics and Hong Kong issues. Reports indicated that the Hong Kong government's strategy against him isn't about cross-border arrest, but rather severing his connections to Hong Kong's resources and infrastructure through financial bans, property and business restrictions in order to maintain ongoing deterrence. Additionally, the Hong Kong government has used the national security law to elevate foreign relations as a high-risk arena. Since the Hong Kong national security law took effect on June 30th, 2020, it has criminalized actions such as colluding with foreign forces and expanded law enforcement powers in the name of national security. By March 23, 2024, the National Security Ordinance, commonly known as Article 23, came into effect, further broadening the scope of offences to include foreign interference, which officials say enhances the national security legal system. In conclusion, the media suggests that the signals being sent by Hong Kong are not just about enhanced public security, but also a tightening of both rules and methods. Commentator Tai Shen-Kun analyzed that the police commissioner Zhou Chow's statement is widely seen as a further alignment of Hong Kong's security and governance model with that of mainland China. He explained that in the past, Hong Kong's public security system focused on limited surveillance, clear purposes, and judicial checks, with CCTV mainly in transportation hubs and high-risk areas. Now with facial recognition, comprehensive monitoring, and surveillance with no blind spots becoming the direction of governance, it can be said that Hong Kong is systematically aligning with the Chinese model. Furthermore, Mr. Tai noted that in the Hong Kong context, the introduction of facial recognition has sparked greater fear among citizens. The Hong Kong government and police have not clarified the data retention period, usage scope, or the specific mechanism for cross-departmental or cross-border data sharing. Additionally, there has been no mention of an independent, effective oversight structure. Given the broad discretionary powers granted to law enforcement by the Hong Kong national security law, the large-scale surveillance system is seen more as a political tool than a mere security measure. From the high conviction rate under the national security law to the citywide facial recognition surveillance, Hong Kong's transformation is not an isolated event. But what remains puzzling is how the city once held as the Pearl of the Orient has slowly arrived at this point. First, let's explore why Hong Kong has suddenly rushed to implement surveillance measures. Hong Kong was originally promised one country, two systems with a commitment to maintain a high degree of autonomy, rule of law, and freedom for 50 years. But the 2019 anti-extradition protests made Beijing uneasy. In 2019, the Hong Kong government proposed amendments to the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance, commonly known as the extradition law. The core issue was that under certain conditions, individuals in Hong Kong could be extradited to mainland China and other regions for trial. Many Hong Kong citizens were concerned about the opacity and politicization of the mainland's judicial system, fearing that this would undermine Hong Kong's judicial independence and the one country, two system framework. This led to widespread protests and demonstrations. The 2019 protests led Beijing to view Hong Kong as out of control, prompting the central government to push through the Hong Kong National Security Law, or NSL, in 2020. Once the law was enacted, Hong Kong's freedom began to shrink. Previously, Hong Kong's surveillance systems emphasized limited and balanced monitoring, with cameras mainly placed at key transportation hubs or high-risk areas. They were not everywhere. Now the focus has shifted to comprehensive surveillance. Commentators argue that this is a direct copy of mainland China's approach. Let's take a closer look at the impact of the NSL. The news mentioned that the conviction rate under the NSL has exceeded 95% over the past 5 years. While this figure might seem efficient, it's almost mythical in global judicial systems. In a normal judicial system, a high conviction rate indicates strong evidence, but in political cases, a 95% conviction rate feels more like a one-sided system. According to Amnesty International on June 30th of last year, since the NSL came into effect on June 30th, 2020, 255 people have been targeted, with over 80% unjustly criminalized and not deserving of prosecution. 89% of these cases involved denied bail, with an average detention of 11 months. By the end of 2025, the total number of arrests reached 385, more than half of whom were charged. The 2025 report from Hong Kong's Judiciary Department showed that complex cases are prioritized, with NSL cases accounting for less than 0.2% of all criminal cases. This doesn't suggest leniency, but rather a precise crackdown on dissent. Among those charged was Jimmy Lai, the founder of Apple Daily, who on December 15th of last year was convicted of 2 counts of colluding with foreign forces and 1 count of conspiracy to publish seditious materials. On February 9th, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison, the heaviest penalty under the NSL. While the UK, the US, and EU and Japan have criticized this as a crackdown on dissent, Beijing's white paper refers to it as legal shield to restore order. Now let's explore why Beijing is taking this approach. Commentators argue that the root cause lies in the CCP's logic of maintaining stability. Hong Kong has long been influenced by British governance, immersed in a relatively free, procedural rule of law environment. But from Beijing's perspective, Hong Kong has always been harder to control. To tighten its grip, Beijing may need to exercise even more control over Hong Kong than it does in some mainland cities. As a result, its governance approach is increasingly aligning with the model used in Xinjiang, essentially looking to replicate Xinjiang's system in Hong Kong. What is the Xinjiang model? According to Human Rights Watch, Xinjiang has a system called the Integrated Joint Operation Platform, IJOP, described as a large-scale surveillance and data integration platform. It consolidates personal information, travel patterns, and various suspicious behavior cues to screen and label so-called key individuals. Multiple reports and studies have highlighted how the Uyghur and the other Muslim minority groups in Xinjiang have been placed under intense surveillance. Estimates suggest that over 1 million people have been sent to re-education camps or vocational training centers. Meanwhile, these efforts are accompanied by accusations of forced labor, suppression of religious and cultural expression, and long-term psychological stress. Streets are filled with cameras, checkpoints are widespread, and targeted data collection, including biometric information, has raised concerns about this use of tracking and controlling minority groups. Hong Kong is now following a similar path, from the national security law to expanding surveillance, all aimed at creating a predictable and controllable political order. According to an OECD AI's report from February 15th, Hong Kong plans to deploy AI facial recognition, starting with high traffic areas similar to Xinjiang's Skynet. A 2020 article from Global Asia noted that for Xi Jinping, there's no distinction between Hong Kong and Xinjiang. They are both central to national security and require strong governance. Hong Kong is not isolated. It's an extension of the same logic, prioritizing security through law, maintaining stability through technology, and diminishing privacy and freedoms. In response, some commentators have bluntly urged Hong Kong residents, the window is closing quickly. If you don't leave now, it might be too late. Another factor, according to external analysis, is the recent rise in immigration from Hong Kong, which has heightened Beijing's sensitivity to instability. Since the implementation of the national security law, the trend of immigration has intensified. A report from the Migration Policy Institute on April 3, 2024 stated that between 2020 and 2022, Hong Kong's labor force decreased by about 140,000 and capital outflows are expected to reach 76 billion USD by 2025. The British National Overseas or BNO visa scheme, which began in January 2021, has seen a cumulative 182,000 applications by the end of 2024. With 176,000 approved. Of these, about 161,000 people have already arrived in the UK. Combined with the renewals, the total number of approvals reached about 219,000. A 2021 survey by the Hong Kong Asia Pacific Institute also showed an increase in immigration intentions, rising from 33% in 2017 to 42%. When a city experiences a sustained outflow of people, it doesn't just lose its population, it also loses capital, skilled professionals, media workers, educational resources, international connections, and even the structure of families and communities. This leads to two outcomes that Beijing does not favor. First, it affects confidence. The more people leave, the more it signals collective uncertainty about the future, and such sentiments are contagious, further amplifying instability. Second, it complicates governance. Immigration often comes with capital flight, dual identities, cross-border communities, and the return of overseas public opinion. Hong Kong, being a highly internationalized hub, raises Beijing's concern that it could become an interface for external conflicts and a channel for the flow of information and resources. In this psychological framework, Beijing is more likely to conclude that since people and resources are moving, it must strengthen the system and technology to secure its foundation, preventing what it sees as potential risk from emerging. Some have raised the question, London and New York have also extensive surveillance systems, so why does Hong Kong's case provoke stronger concern? The key issue is not whether there is surveillance, but whether there are clear boundaries, strict procedures, and accountable oversight behind the monitoring. Take the UK as an example. The UK also uses and even tests street-level facial recognition, but at least it faces ongoing legal and regulatory challenges. In 2020, the UK Court of Appeal ruled in the landmark Bridges case that the real-time automatic facial recognition used by South Wales police did not meet legal requirements in key areas. The court found issues with privacy rights, data protection, impact assessments, and equal obligations. This case shows that technology isn't just about being implemented. It can be halted by the courts, questioned by civil society, and closely monitored by regulatory bodies. The European Union's approach offers a clear contrast. The EU's Artificial Intelligence Act classifies real-time remote biometric identification by law enforcement in public spaces such as facial recognition as a highly sensitive application. It sets very strict requirements. Authorities must demonstrate necessity and proportionality, typically with prior authorization along with rights impact assessment and other procedural requirements. The EU's approach establishes boundaries at the regulatory level. The more advanced the technology, the higher the threshold for its use. Authorities must first conduct an impact assessment on individual rights and meet strict authorization and proportionality criteria before considering whether and to what extent the technology can be deployed. When a camera every few steps becomes a target, the issue is no longer just about public safety, but whether individuals can still retain their basic rights and privacy. Some online commentators argue that while more cameras may make the city seem orderly, they also gradually diminish the personal spaces of citizens. The end result is that Hong Kong is becoming increasingly aligned with mainland China.